Thank you, Jeff. My title, I really love it. Sorry. But it never ceases to amaze me that the world is full of people who will love us and who we can love. And for every one of Team Homo sapiens to find themselves in that wonderful situation says to me that we've got to be different. And so to use a title that risk and change, like love, are in the eye of the beholder is what I'm going to talk about. But given that my career has really been has straddled this risk and organisational change area. Now I can't find my clicker. Oh, here it is. I thought I was a bit of a rule follower, but one of the things I realised is I've put a credential slide in that nobody else had. Ever so sorry. Not really because I want to brag a lot about what I've done, but just to say a little bit about how I found Jeff and Risk Type Compass, and a little bit of my motivation for being a real advocate for it. I'm not a psychologist, so I think one of the things that's really great about this instrument is that it's really practical for people who are not psychologists to do really great work with it. I'm a chemist by training, but that is many years ago. But my doctoral research is in management and around organisational change from the perspective of the recipients of change. However, over the years, I've really been a change person who then and did a lot of change work in highly regulated industries, and really got very frustrated as to how the perception of risk was about compliance, was about minimising risk, being risk averse, and trying to control risky variables down to lowest practicable levels. Yet, it's great. I'm old, so I remember the time when people didn't talk about risk as if it was about creation and protection of value, like ISO 31000 does now, but where it was really all about something that was a bit nasty and you needed to avoid it rather than embrace it to create value. And I got quite frustrated about this and said, why is no one writing about people aspects of risk management in business? Risk psychologists were, behavioural economics people were, but in business, why is no one talking about this? So in the mid 2000s, 2005, 6, I started getting an interest in this, wrote some books, stumbled across Risk Type Compass, and I've been using it, and I've been using it ever since. So I just my talk really is about, I'm going to share a couple of case studies where I've used the Risk Type Compass with organisations who were embarking on significant organisational change, but through that just, I suppose, highlight some of the benefits that I found and some of the things that I've learned going forward. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't it? I'm Ruth Murray-Webster and I'm a compose type. I'm a fairly moderate compose type. I've also learned that there's absolutely no way that Johan would pick me to be an air traffic controller, because although I'm composed, I would score really highly on forgiving. It'd be no good, would I? Absolutely no good whatever. So anyway, that's something I don't need to do with the rest of my career. Okay, so eye of the beholder. I suppose wanted to just build up my story, and maybe this is obvious to some of you, but my starting assumptions on this subject. I start with, I guess, a point of view that, whether it's in business or in life in general, that values created from difference. It really would not do for us all to be the same. Difference is great, difference in perspective, in ideas, and of course what organisations are trying to do, certainly ones that are for profit, are trying to differentiate from their competition so that they can create value. And that clearly involves taking risks. And that's, you know, all embedded now in contemporary standards for, you know, board representation and responsibilities of boards, and, you know, flows through public sector. But, you know, whether what our objectives are about making tangible investments or emotional investments, then you know, that is my starting point. And that, therefore, we need to do things differently. And certainly if you're thinking about any planned organisational change, you know, whether it's you're building something new, you're acquiring, you're integrating, you're restructuring, you're reorganising, all of those things that people like me who are change consultants help their clients to do, doing things like you've always done them is not really going to give you the answer that you want. So it means doing something a bit different, and therefore you need to take some risks and make some informed decisions in the light of the uncertainty that inevitably is present. So clearly, you know, all of those people who are making decisions, you know, from the top to the bottom, you know, people who are driving the change, people who are the recipients of change and are deciding whether they're going to play or not, are all making those judgments from the perception of their starting dispositions. And therefore, it would be pretty stupid to assume that all decision makers are the same and are going to line up with, you know, mine or, you know, the chairman's or the chief executive's perception of what should happen, in the same way that when we're planning projects and delivering change, assuming that all recipients of change are going to see things in the same way is similarly pointless and delusional, ends the eye of the beholder theme. I'm I'm not taking questions, so if you disagree with me, hold it and like the panel session. Okay, but a further complication on that, and I think as Jeff said, when we first met, I was doing some writing and some research, little R research, and writing a book on group risk attitude, and with a colleague, David Hilson, we were looking for some insight really in that when decision-making groups were working together, what were some of the things that were affecting their perception of risk, and therefore the choices that they made under uncertainty. And in looking at that, and we found, and this will not be a surprise, I'm sure, to anyone, but that if the arrowhead is the first influence, that what we found, and I think it bears out in lots of my practical experience, that actually if you've got a leader, someone who is perceived as the leader, upheld as the leader, and is not afraid of, is not the sort of leader who listens first but who speaks first, then it is very likely that their perception of what should happen and their risk attitude will be upheld by the team, and in worst case will go unchallenged, so that people follow the leader. Got a couple of guests in the audience who know a company that I worked in very recently where that happened. What we, David and I, also found was that the second influence behind that, and we might call it, oh well, we always do this around here. It is our culture, but that the decision-making groups were very willing to follow the leader, but were also very willing to do what they normally do. We always do it like this. It's tried and tested. I have experience. All those things that we really value. But actually, if you're really trying to do fundamental change, maybe not so useful. And then the third one that I colloquially call safety in numbers, and that scientifically we might talk about groupthink, or we might talk about a risky shift or a cautious shift. So, the risky shift being the teenager on the street corner. They probably don't stand on street corners anymore, but in my day we stood on the street corner idling, looking for something to do, and somebody suggests doing something a bit naughty and we all talk ourselves into it. Or that in a risky shift, or that in organisations, a board sitting around a table and someone has a bright idea, but somebody maybe with a wary disposition says, I'm not really sure about that, what if that, and it goes, and what if, and what if, and what if, and what if, and you've got a cautious shift going on. So we know that as human beings, we're also disposed to maintain the social pack, and so actually being out on a limb is not a comfortable place for lots of people to be during change. So I was thinking about all this stuff, and that actually the unchallenged and normal behaviours have really great validity for normal decisions. We want to be efficient, we want to be stable in routine operations, but actually if you really want to change it, if you really want to bring about something fundamentally different, then a more maybe eyes open awareness is important. So, I had some starting assumptions and some work that I was, thinking about a lot, and stumbled happily on the risk type compass. So there's a few things that I just wanted to say on this slide about risk type, and that nobody else has said yet, so I feel compelled to say it, because I actually find, and because I'm not a psychologist, I don't know whether that helps or hinders in this, but I do find that people who I work with often do confuse personality type with behaviour. So what I always say to them is, look, we have a type, we have a personality. Of course, we're able to flex our behaviour. A highly valued attribute of senior leaders is behavioural flexibility. And when things are going well or we're in flow, then most of us are probably quite good at flexing from our type. I do know, though, that under pressure, people tend to revert to type, and therefore, in change situations that can be quite, where you're really putting yourself out on a limb as a leader, or where you're really feeling pressure to change as a recipient of change, and that's really uncomfortable, then actually people do revert to type quite a lot. So understanding type, I think, is a really good thing. That's not to say we should label ourselves unhelpfully. The other thing that I find all the time, and I'm sure you all do, is that whenever you use any instrument like this, it's easy to see how you are as being quite advantageous in some way, and opposites as being, they're a bit dodgy, aren't they, and, it's really easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking that, if a particular set of attributes is somehow better or worse, good or bad, that's not true. Actually, it's not true at all. It's just a feature of your perception. It's a feature of your type. And so it's really important to my work, and I think that Risk Type Compass really helps us do that, because it is a continuous 360-degree spectrum, and also ever so cleverly, Jeff, I have to say, I think uses language that really helps people just connect with that, and almost to embrace, my preferences, but also to see the value in others' preferences. Really interesting, a bit of an aside, but the people who I've found in debriefing this who struggle the most are axial types. I remember one person saying to me, does that mean I'm really boring? No, it means that you're really well placed to see lots of other perspectives. And I was really interested in, I can't see Christine now, but what Christine was saying about the engineering organisation and project managers and the ones who were less deliberate types, weaker deliberate types, more axial, who are much better placed as facilitators of change, and facilitation in change is one of the things I'm really interested in. Anyway, back on script somehow. If you think about, risk type during change, and the blob on there is, it's moved. I'm not one of those. There's something that's happened with my slide builds. I sit consistently about here, just so to the bit round past 4 o'clock in compost type. What that means is on this orthogonal axis, sorry, pointed at the wrong bit, on this orthogonal axis, I'm not highly prudent, I'm not highly carefree, I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but in terms of emotion, then I'm pretty calm. And what's interesting, and some people in this room have seen me not calm, but the more things are really bad, the calmer I am. So I can be really quite agitated about not a lot, but actually then something really bad's happened and I'm like, okay, right, let's move on. Now I know that if you're really calm, sometimes you're not the natural person to be really inspiring during change, to be really energetic, to be the one that when there's a bit of a lull in proceedings, and we've been at this for a while, really to be very, really holding the vision and really pushing that forward. I know that doesn't come naturally to me, and it's something that I would need to flex to be that. I'm not particularly creative. I don't have great ideas. I'm quite good at spotting other people's and running with them. I think that's what one of what my teacher said at school. Ruth's really good at listening to what we say to her and then using it. I think that's probably going to be my epitaph. So, I'm never going to do anything really brilliant, but if you've got a great idea, wow, I can spot that and run with it. But it just seems to me that when we are undergoing change, and change is uncertain, and there are threats and there are opportunities, there are all sorts of behaviours that we need to see demonstrated, and therefore a whole range of types that are quite useful. So, a couple of case studies to share. The first one is some work that I did back in 2010, I think, with an international mining company. I think I can probably just use the name. It's not a secret, so it was Rio Tinto, headquartered in London, FTSE 10 company, very, very successful at making lots and lots of money out of extracting things out of the ground, and if you hold Rio Tinto shares, you'll have done very well over the years. I don't, by the way. But anyway, working with Rio Tinto, and I was working with, I was asked to go and help the newly appointed group head of risk for Rio Tinto, based in London, who had inherited a team, not a large team, so a central risk team, who were responsible for making sure that then across the Rio Tinto empire around the world, that I suppose enterprise risk management was done well, so that the organisation, that the board understood the risks that they faced, that controls were effective, that whether that was, stopping underground collapses of mines, or whether it was, diversifying into extraction of new minerals. So the whole spectrum of what they were doing. The guy who was brought in had come from the business, so he knew how to spell risk, and that was about it. And which wasn't a bad thing. And he was brought in to shift the culture in that team from one where risk was seen very much as a defensive tactic, comply, don't do anything wrong, cautious, to risk as a decision-making tool for the organisation, the board, the exec, and all the business usuals down. The original team did not see what was wrong with the way things were. They were highly offended that this upstart from the business, this rising star, was going to come in and lead their team, because they had been risk professionals all of their career, through and through. And what was wrong? We were compliant with ISO 31000. We have a leading tool. We've done lots of training. Like, we are, fellows of the IRM. Like, what can we possibly learn? So I was brought in to help him with the change to, it was called a risk culture change, but he really needed to start with this team. So the blobs on here are the risk types of the people in the team. But not unlike your experience in the Scottish Land Registry, all of the, let's call them the old guard, are the ones to the, where's my pointer? I'm not pointing very well. To the right of that blue line. So the people who, and it would seem to me that there are many people who are maybe historically drawn to careers in risk, careers in assurance, who absolutely value detail and analytical and methodical, and maybe just maybe a bit risk averse themselves, and who tend to that sort of upper right hand of the spectrum there. All the new guard, so the new leader was the carefree type, and there were he brought in some people to help him. A couple of them were adventurous types, and there was it was called spontaneous before, wasn't it? Excitable. Yeah, sorry, I still remember it being the spontaneous type, but the excitable type. And they were all new people that had been brought in to this team. And there was just a complete breakdown in understanding of what was required, because the people who'd been running the team over here just felt they were doing everything perfectly. Show me where we're not doing this. We've done everything right. And this is an organisation with a lot of money, so they'd invested a lot. This was not risk management done on a shoestring. They were doing some textbook great things, but yet had not found a way to actually engage the people in the business, in the first line of defence, who needed to make risk-based judgments day by day to really engage with the subject. So we used Risk Type Compass really effectively in this team to start having that conversation about what was the change that Rio Tinto needed to make, and why was that. And there were some who just didn't buy it and they left, and went on to have wonderful careers doing something else, because they were good people, really good people, but just could not see the vision. And others could see the vision and flex their style. And Mark, who was the head, who was over here in the carefree type, also learned some of the benefits of actually having that, if you're going to be the person who goes to Risk and Audit Committee and the board of Rio Tinto and to talk about their principal risks, that it's sort of best that you've not just made them up. And that there's a bit of data underpinning that. He wouldn't have completely made them up, but it was a really very, very useful way of getting that team to understand the change they needed to make and to know how to flex their style to be effective in that environment. And I've continued to work with Rio Tinto over the years, and really interesting how they've started then to, as many organisations have, to think more explicitly about board appetite for risk, and how board appetite for risk obviously is very different in a safety environment. Yes, absolutely, they want people to go home safe every day. But, you know, if you're a miner today, you know, with all of the sociological pressure on, you know, that goes with raping and pillaging, you know, the natural resources of countries that, you know, you're not a member of. And that, sorry, a bit of a bias there, and also that there's a huge, you know, technological changes where, you know, we might not be relying on, you know, mining cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo to, you know, to going to battery technology and, you know, the advantages of things like graphene and, you know, in some or that actually that people are increasingly looking at non-mined diamonds because the, you know, the ecological and sociological impact of mining diamonds becomes unacceptable. So really rich people who wear fake ones, you know, so there's you know, we live in a world of change, isn't that wonderful? But that actually, if you might think about a miner as well, you know, their major risks are about not having underground collapses and not killing people, and the thing, you know, the things where they're innovating is about, you know, no people in mines, you know, so purely autonomous mining operations. And that would be their focus. But, you know, they've got, if they're going to stay viable, they need to take some big risks in terms of diversification of the sorts of things that they're doing. So, you know, this is a wonderful tool to have those conversations with boards. And I haven't used another mining company where I think Jeff and I first talked was a South African mining company where I used Risk Type Compass with their board, and it was it was really raised some good insight. So, okay, I'm running out of time. My second case, just I used the tool in exactly the same way, I guess, but in a very different purpose. So I've done quite a lot of work with universities going through change over the past few years, and you know, anybody who is anywhere near a university, has a child in one or all the rest of it, knows that universities have been turned on their head. You know, the higher education sector has been turned on its head in the UK. That student satisfaction is really important, and that there's no money or not enough money, and therefore change in the way that academic staff work, how they use technology to teach well, but also to service what students want and put students at the heart of the service offering is really important, and that can be seen as you know, highly undesirable, or at least very risky from the people who've had a long career in not doing things differently for a while. So I used Risk Type Compass actually with the group of people who they were actually in their library and information service, library and research services, about how they were working with academics to change the way that academics worked with library and worked with information to put students at the centre. And what was really interesting with this is that there were this person up here that was a wary type was a really long-standing and experienced leader in the university and in the library sector, and she just could not see that the vision could ever work. So as a change leader, she was sabotaging the work of the team, not because she was a bad person, just because she just couldn't see this would ever work. And so was sabotaging the work of the team at every step. The senior leader, once again, bit of an interesting, maybe the more senior you get, some of those more adventurous characteristics come through. she could see all the possibilities and none of the pitfalls, which is also not really smart, because there were lots of pitfalls. And what was also very interesting, there was a character here, and I had a spontaneous type in the Rio Tinto example too, where, I find this a really interesting type, the people who are absolutely full of ideas, full of possibilities, on this axis score very highly on carefree, but are also highly emotional. So the combination of carefree and intense actually, in my experience, leads to micromanagement, because although they've got lots of great ideas and don't want to particularly be methodical, they are so afraid of failure that then micromanage in a bit of a random way all along. So this was also a feature of that team. And again, you know, we used this to be able to have, we did some individual coaching and some team coaching, but you know, although this, and I use this example because you might have gone into a consultancy environment here, which was about a massive organisational change and a team that were at the heart of that, and say, well, what's that got to do with risk? Well, it's everything to do with risk as far as I'm concerned, and that this instrument, you know, almost, it is about risk type, but it absolutely transcends the sorts of settings where people who've got a hat that say risk on it sit, if that makes sense. So just to wrap up, because I've taken all my time, I mean, my experience over the years is that, yeah, clearly nothing stays the same. So understanding the interplay between risk and change is vital for organisational survival. It's vital for the survival of our species and our relationships and all the rest of it. Dr. Toms, where's Dr. Toms? I think is here. Lovely paper on resistance is futile that's been published there. I would just add to that, so in my doctoral research I was really interested in change from the perspective of the change recipient, and we always people talk about resistance to change, that like that's somehow illogical or illegitimate. Well, you know, that if your world is changing, it is both logical and legitimate to have a point of view on that. And therefore, actually, as a way of exploring attitudes to change, then I find this really useful. And then my favourite quote and actually piece of art is Willem de Kooning's installation in Rotterdam. I have to change to stay the same, and I think, you know, that is true for all of us. So given that, you know, being aware, know thyself is really important, and is actually a prerequisite to being able to then, if you know yourself, you can appreciate others. So, you know, where might we be getting in the way of change, either as a driver or a recipient of it? You know, where do we need to just open our eyes and help people see things differently, or appreciate that people see things differently? And I just find, you know, Risk Type Compass really, it's quick, it's easy to use. I know we shouldn't say this, Polly, but it's also very affordable, which really matters when you're starting to introduce a tool like this. And you know, over the years that I've spent helping clients take, you know, eyes open risks and lead effective change, I've not come across a better, more usable psychometric test that helps with that. I believe that if we can appreciate one another, we've got a better chance of acting effectively, and Risk Type Compass can help us do that. Thank you.